WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM's Master of Business Administration is designed to accommodate the career needs of professionals across a variety of work organizations. More information at business.udmercy.edu.
It's The Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Nick Austin. Today on the program, not sure if you heard about it, but there was a presidential debate yesterday, and we'll talk about what went down with a debate expert later this hour.
But first, on The Metro, it's been almost a month since Wayne State University student protesters were removed from campus. Like many student movements across the country, students at Wayne State University are asking the Board of Governors to consider a policy that would divest from weapons manufacturers. The resolution was passed by the Student Senate in November. It's yet to be brought to a vote by the Board of Governors, and people were hoping to get answers to questions at the Wayne State University Board of Governors meeting this past Wednesday. Wayne State made the decision to host the meeting online, but many students gathered on campus to watch and make public comments. To discuss the Board of Governors meeting and continued organizing efforts of students on campus, we're joined by WDET's Nargis Rahman. Nargis, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Tia.
And before we get into it, WDET did reach out to Wayne State University. They declined to comment. But while we start out and begin the conversation, we know about the BDS movement. You talked about it a little bit before in the past, but can you just talk about it again so people understand what's happening on campus with the students?
So specifically on college campuses, the BDS movement, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, aims to have universities stop investing or, take out their investments from manufacturers or war manufacturers in a way that is impacting the Gaza-Israel conflict at the moment. So this is something that we've been seeing on several college campuses where different student groups are asking their universities to stop sending funds that might impact the current conflict, and also in an extension of that is impacting their families or themselves or people that they know that are being impacted by the war. So this is something that at Wayne State, the Student Senate passed in November. And as of now, we know that the Board of Governors has yet to put it on the agenda or vote on this matter.
And just speaking of the Board of Governors, why did they move that meeting online?
So when we reached out to Wayne State University, they did not say why they moved the meeting online or whether the other meetings will also be virtual from here on out. However, Wayne State Associate Director of Communications, Bill Roos, said that the formats and locations of the meetings are at the discretion of the Board of Governors. One of the theories that people feel like is that, they didn't want disruptions at this meeting, especially because of the encampment being taken down last month, and they expected people to protest or be there at that meeting.
Which we did see a few folks that were on campus there. So it was the first meeting since the encampment last month. Many people were hoping for a response or explanation or something. What did the Board of Governors say?
So what they did say is that there are some investments that might be controversial, but what they did not say was anything about the encampment, the police arrests that were made on campus, or whether or not they would be voting on the BDS resolution, which is still up in the air and something that students are still waiting for a response from the university. They also had two presentations about Wayne State University and Wayne State University Foundation investments, and that's where they mentioned some of those facts and figures that people have been asking for months now.
And just based on the response from the audience or the response from those that you've heard from, what were some of the sentiments there? Like, what were they feeling when they heard or saw those numbers and saw the figures and actually saw Wayne State saying, yes, we do actually have these investments?
Well, they had a watch party at the UGL, and our reporter Amanda LeClaire was there watching what the students were saying and doing. So what they essentially did was had a space for students to be together and be able to watch the meeting and make their public comments. Some of the sentiments were that they were not surprised that this was the issue, but they also didn't like the response from the university in terms of this is going to be difficult and unaccomplishable.
Right now, we are chatting with WDET's Nargis Rahman. Nargis has been covering the university's reaction to student protests along with WDET's Amanda LeClaire. Now, right now, Nargis, we talked a little bit about divestment, but what did Wayne State actually say about divesting? Noah said it was going to be a little bit complicated. We do actually have a little bit of audio from that meeting.
On both the pool and the endowment fund, our exposure to companies, and there's a specific definition that, have any part in manufacturing whole or components of something considered a controversial weapon, is something between 1.25 and 1.5%.
So what does that actually mean, if you could break that down for us a little bit?
Yeah, so Bethany Gilchick also said that in translation to those small percentages of perhaps controversial investments, the university would have to divest out of 80% of all current investments to get out of the entire fund, because making changes, you can't make changes from a specific little area. You have to take the whole fund portfolio out. And so then the university would have to choose from a narrower portfolio to divest from war manufacturers. So it's a little bit more complicated than what it seems like on surface value.
And if you are aware, if you know this, do you know if Wayne State's ever divested before from a group or a company?
So one of the things that the students were specifically even talking about at the comments is that Wayne State has done this before, even when it was difficult or where they would be profitable to stay into the investments. One of those examples is when they divested from tobacco companies and said that they didn't want to do any business with anyone who was profiting from that. And they also divested in the past from South African apartheid. And so the university does have a track record of listening to students and the concerns of the university. So the students feel like the university does have the opportunity to correct this measure and be able to discuss this further and do something about it.
Earlier, we heard from Bethany Gilchick, who is the Senior Vice President of Business Affairs. Now, right now, Nargis, have you heard anything about or anything more from the student groups or their next moves? We know that after the meeting, this is per Metro Times, a prominent sign on campus was covered in red paint. So what are some of the things that you were hearing, or some of the things that Amanda was hearing about, after the meeting?
I feel like, so one of the things the students were showing concern about is that they still felt like their voices weren't being heard fully. And one of the examples of that was the fact that the meeting was held virtually. And so they weren't able to be there in person and discuss their concerns. They were also frustrated with all the tech issues that were happening during the virtual meeting. And there was over 20 people who made comments. A majority of them was regarding the encampment, the police brutality, and the other issues at hand that were not discussed. And as we know, the public comments were also moved to the end of the meeting, which is different from what usually happens where they're heard in the beginning. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity to get any feedback from the board. So we won't even hear back from them until the next board meeting.
Which is
in September. So they have to wait until September 13th to be able to even hear any feedback from the things that they were talking to them about. However, we know that the students have been talking about these things on and on for months now. They do feel like they're being ignored by administration, and they're offended by the responses that were given to them. They want more students and community members to be informed and join them in this movement for divestment. And they want to also, hear answers about how their university is going to correct their actions in terms of the police response, the administration response. Is the university ever going to sit down with the students publicly and discuss these issues up front? There's also alumni movement that is gathering signatures and saying we're not going to send money or donations to the university until some of these wrongs are corrected. One of the last things I would say is that some of the commenters also said the university should issue an apology for the way that the students were handled in the removing of the encampment. And so those are just some of the things that are up in the air. And we'll have to wait and see what the university does in the future to respond to some of these things.
WDET's Nargis Rahman joined us in studio to tell us more about the Board of Governors meeting and what's happening on Wayne State's campus with student protesters. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It is the Metro on 1019 WDET. So much coming up for you on today's show, including looking at the Detroit Pistons NBA draft and reflecting on the presidential debate. But coming up, we're going to take a look at some things happening with Michigan Theater when we discuss the events coming up with the creative director of Michigan Stage. Keep it locked right here as we return with more from the Metro.
WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at the University of Detroit Mercy. UDM is offering a new Master of Science degree in ethical leadership focused on sustainable, ethical, and inclusive problem solving. Admission is open to qualified applicants with a bachelor's degree in any field. Course selection is flexible, with no prerequisites, 4 required courses, and 6 electives. Learn more at business.udmercy.edu.
It's the Metro on 1019 WDET. Got a cool conversation coming up with the creative director of Michigan Stage, Tim Paré, coming up for you. Before we do that, though, letting you know about the weather. Today will be partly cloudy with a high of 80 degrees. Moving into the weekend, chance of thunderstorms, temperatures reading 86 degrees. But Tia.
Yes, indeed, Nick. You know, we're talking about theater, we're talking about stage, Michigan Stage. I want to see your jazz hands.
Oh, these?
Yeah, that was amazing.
Trust me, radio listeners, it was amazing.
It so much. No matter the form, storytelling can bring people together and to one space to experience collective emotions like happiness, sadness, fear, you name it. But humans have a way to connect through shared experiences. A local theater wants to make sure everyone has a chance to connect with their neighbors. And if you enjoy local theater with a big heart, then Michigan Stage may be for you. With a mission to produce accessible theater to celebrate with community members, we have Tim Paré here. He is the creative director of Michigan Stage, and Paré is going to tell us a little bit more about the summer lineup and more about Michigan Stage. Tim, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a thrill to be here.
Awesome. Go green.
Yeah, go Wild.
So you began Michigan Stage in 2020. What was the reason?
So I had grown up in the area, and then I left because there wasn't a ton of opportunity to pursue this professionally. And so I spent 15 years in New York. But all the while in the back of my mind, I knew I had to come back to Michigan. I identify so much with the Midwest and with the community spirit that founded me and shaped me as a person. And so, around 2020, there was this little thing going on in the world. Yeah. We were locked in our apartments in New York. And I said, this is the time. So it all came to fruition. I called my mom from my roof in Brooklyn, and I said, I'm coming home to found a theater, with really no idea what that meant or even what would happen. And here we are 3 years later, and it's sort of remarkable to see where we've grown.
I know. I mean, I just love when I hear people say, I started this during COVID-19 pandemic, and here we are years later, and it's still going, and it's growing, and it's flourishing. So what makes Michigan Stage different from other small theaters?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Well, number one, we're professional, and so everyone who works for us gets paid. And I want to make sure that I say I love people who love theater as a hobby. We would not be here without hobbyists, but I also think it's very important to show that you can get paid, that this is a professional opportunity and a path that people could pursue. So that is number one. Beyond that, we've got these incredible youth programs that are called Play Labs, and we developed these in partnership with our local public schools. So the idea behind it was, usually high school has some theater departments, middle school every so often, but beyond that, younger, nothing, no exposure. And so we created this after-school model. It sort of works like a club, like a sport, like a league, really. And so we go directly into the schools. The students stick around right after. We're offering these programs. It's pay what you can, so it's essentially free for anyone who wants to participate. And they're during that peak unsupervised time as well. So when a student would probably be on their own if a parent's off at work, we're giving them something pro-social to be involved in, something that connects them with their other community members. And then more than that, they're writing their own plays. So this isn't just doing Lion King or Little Mermaid, nothing against Lion King or Little Mermaid. I love both of those plays, but this is completely original. So everybody gets the part that they want. Whether that's on stage, off stage, they get to define their own experience. And I think that that's so important.
It is. And, just talking a little bit more and building off of that, because you talked about kids in the school, what's the Theater for All initiative?
Yeah, so Theater for All, I think with a lot of other programs, there are a lot of prerequisites. You usually have to have some experience. You have to be able to memorize lines. You have to be able to read the scripts. Usually you have to have a family that supports you and can maybe pay for lessons outside of the program. With us, we throw all that to the wind and we say anyone who wants to be involved can. And in fact, with that as our motto and our mission, we just this past semester brought these programs to senior citizens. And so now we're partnering with All Seasons Birmingham to do the exact same model with seniors. And so it's just been really fulfilling to see how they've latched on to the curriculum and the stories that they tell, that they want to tell, that were very important to them. In many ways, it's very different than the youth. And then in other ways, it's very similar. Yeah. So yeah, Theater for All for us means like anyone can be involved, and not just from the perspective of sitting in the seat and watching like an audience member.
Love that. Tim Paré is the artistic director for Michigan Stage, which we are talking about right now. So, of course, for yourself, why theater? Of course, I'm assuming that you did theater at Michigan State University.
I did, yes. Yeah. I was a theater major at Michigan State. And I grew up doing theater. I actually went to the Warren Consolidated School of Performing Arts in Sterling Heights. And I think I gravitated toward it probably because I was a loud and flamboyant child, and my family was like, get him on a stage. Which was wonderful because I never looked back. And it was wonderful to find my tribe in that sense, to be around people not only like me, but who could tolerate me. Because I was a lot as a kid. I won't deny that.
I'm glad you admit it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that right. I think all of us can agree with being a lot as kids.
Yeah. But then it evolved too. Like as I got older, I started to see the benefits and how it transferred to my everyday life, and how I was noticing all the skills that I was developing in rehearsals, the ability to resolve conflict with friends, to tap into emotions, to articulate and express how I was feeling, where a lot of environments don't really welcome or support that. You know, most of the time, I think as adults, we forget that we're able to feel and to perform, and sometimes performing our emotions is really fulfilling and cathartic. So as I get older, I see all of this great benefit that I maybe like took for granted when I was younger.
Yeah, and the way you're explaining it and talking about it being, for myself being a person who played sports most of my life, it sounds like that type of feeling where you don't know the things that you're learning at the time, the camaraderie, the community that you're building with people, and how to do that. You don't know those things until you, like you said, you get out into the real world, quote unquote, and you're using those resources. So
totally.
Thank you. Yeah. So just continuing on once again, talking about kids and young people in general within theater. You talked a little bit about just being inside the schools, and I know a lot of the times, especially in the city of Detroit and in some of the Metro Detroit areas, there aren't many arts outlets, whether it's music, theater, no matter what it is, there aren't many outlets. So talk about being that bridge there, trying to help guide the kids to other outlets.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. It really has been so special. We've grown really organically. Our first program we actually did at an offsite location where students came to us. So we had about 9 people, and then it just continued to snowball. I mean, like exponentially every semester. Now we're impacting 300 students every semester across 8 schools and 3 different districts. And this upcoming year, we have 2 new districts who are sort of vying for us. If we could find the teaching artists to run them all, we would say yes to everyone, but that's another issue too. But yeah, there are not a lot of opportunities, and the opportunities that are there are very few and far between. And so beyond being able to be there 5 days a week in some of these school districts, bringing the community behind us for the performances, volunteering on the sets and costumes, getting the parents involved, we're also able to employ 20 teaching artists who are local professionals who do this for a living. And the students see that and say, oh, wait, this is a job. This is something that I could pursue if I wanted to do this continually in my future. And I never had that growing up. And so that's been really rewarding to see and to be able to give back to the community.
And that's the thing I've been hearing a lot about within the theater community, those who are starting up small production groups or those who have larger ones. It's the idea that we have to mentor the next generation, or we won't have what we need for theater. We won't have people to watch. So, if we can expand on that, just the need for people who are skilled within the theater realm.
Yeah, I almost forget about that. That's such a wonderful question, because there is such this defeatist attitude in the broader world of theater that like audiences are dying and that it's drying up, that this is an art form that people are less passionate about. And I say absolutely not. Like, it is clearly, look at how much our programs have grown so quickly. They just don't know that it's out there. And so it's our job to sort of bridge those gaps, to piece those things together. But we're really investing in the next generation of theater goers. Mm-hmm. And so every summer, this is our first summer doing it, but we're offering 3 professional productions. And this is another partnership with a school district. But these productions are unique because they're bringing in professional and Broadway talent from New York and from California and Chicago, coming to work directly in our community with local professionals, mentoring students who, again, are seeing these as jobs and realistic careers, professions. And I'm just so happy to be able to say, like, if you're getting more and more interested in theater, here are shows for you to come see and to continue to support the arts.
Yes, and if we can, just before I let you go, Michigan Stage summer lineup. You said this is the first summer that you're going to be doing 3 productions in this way. So give us a little bit of a rundown.
Yeah, you got it. It's a summer stock model. So for my theater goers, that is like show on top of show on top of show. We are exactly that. We're currently rehearsing 2. Our 3rd starts next week. The first of which is Lost in Yonkers by Neil Simon. This is the Pulitzer Prize and Tony Award-winning play. It's about a heartfelt and humorous story about a Jewish family living in Yonkers in 1942. The second show is new. It's called Peerless by G. Hay Park, and it tells the story of these identical twins who are desperate to get into a very competitive college. And so it's a dark comedy about the lengths they'll go to stop another student from getting in, sort of like Macbeth meets Mean Girls. Very, very funny.
Interesting.
Yeah, really, really cool. And then the 3rd is Guys and Dolls, hailed as the perfect Broadway musical. It tells the story of sin and romantic salvation, but it really spotlights the vibrant pulse of New York and the fun, the fun of that world. And I'm fortunate enough to be directing that one.
Yay. So it's so much fun happening for you all at Michigan Stage this summer. And it does look like that you have Lost in Yonkers July 11th through July 20th, 2024. So if you are interested in anything happening with Michigan Stage, where can they find more information?
MichiganStage.com, .org. We're also at Michigan Stage on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.
Yay. Tim Paré is the artistic director for Michigan Stage, as well a Spartan. Go Green.
Yay.
Thanks for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET. As Tia mentioned a little earlier, coming up, we're going to have a conversation about how Detroit's LGBTQ community has been embraced and at times excluded by religious organizations here in Southeast Michigan. But today, Detroit doesn't really have what you might refer to as a gayborhood. Is that the phrase I'm using correctly there, Tia? All right.
Yes,
good.
you are.
Well,
Yes, you are.
Good. So other areas and cities with a large gay population, I do like that term. Think of San Francisco's The Castro or The Village in New York City. Just talking about New York right now. Boys Town in Chicago.
I love that, by the way.
Do you?
Yeah.
Well, at one time, Detroit's Palmer Park area was Detroit's unofficial gayborhood. For more on the history, we turn to Laura Herberg and the Curiosity Archives.
I'm Laura Herberg, and this is Curiosity, where WDET finds the answers to your questions about everything Detroit.
My name is Ryan LeClaire. I'm from Ann Arbor, and I grew up in Rochester Hills, Michigan, and I'm interested in the history of whether or not there was a gay neighborhood in Detroit.
It's a Thursday afternoon at Menjo's, an iconic gay bar that opened up on 6 Mile near Woodward in 1973. On the dance floor, between a rainbow flag and a larger-than-life representation of a male organ, there hangs a tattered disco ball.
This was the actual disco ball that hung in the club when we opened, and Madonna used to live locally. She used to dance underneath this disco ball.
Manager Tim McKee is giving me a tour of the artifacts that the club has collected over the years. As one of the few long-standing gay bars still open in the city, it serves as a kind of makeshift museum to Detroit's LGBT past. After World War II, downtown Detroit was a hub for gay bars. Then, starting in the 1950s, the gay population began following the migration pattern of many Metro Detroiters, heading northward. By the 1970s, there was a community in the Palmer Park area around Menjo's.
There was one building we called the barracks. There's 48 apartment units and 46 of them were gay men.
That's Greg Piazza. He's a former Palmer Park resident who wrote a book on the neighborhood's history. Piazza says the architecture of the buildings, open-minded management, and some child-free living policies attracted a strong gay contingent. He remembers that on nice days, people would congregate on a stretch of lawn nicknamed the Green Beach.
And it was where you went to show off for the season and check out your latest friend. And on a day like today, there would be 40 people.
Piazza remembers 8 bars and a couple gay-friendly bookstores and restaurants in the 1980s. But eventually, he felt the neighborhood change.
I just turned around one day and it was like everybody was gone. All my friends were gone.
They moved northward, he says, mostly to Ferndale. But in some respects, Palmer Park has remained a hub for the African-American gay community. For the past 20 years, the Black Gay Pride celebration, Hotter Than July, has hosted its annual picnic there. An agency for African Americans called LGBT Detroit puts on the event. Director Curtis Lipscomb recognizes the significance of the Palmer Park area, but he isn't convinced gay neighborhoods facilitate progress.
I believe that once I live next to my neighbor and my neighbor is different than I am, I think that's when walls can be torn down.
Do you feel like the piece answered your question, Ryan?
I think it just reminds me that there's a lot of contention about whether or not, gay neighborhoods are really a good solution for the future. But I think, there's still a need for some sort of space, especially, when we have events like Orlando.
Indeed, Menjo's manager Tim McKee says after the tragedy, they saw a surge in attendance. Because gay clubs, McKee says, are the heart and soul of the community.
That was Laura Herber. She's the civic life reporter for Outlaw Media, and this is The Metro.
This is The Metro, and coming up, we'll chat with local reporter Annalise Frank about Metro Detroit Church's acceptance of same-sex marriages, and they're still ambiguous. You all stay right there.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET. Got another conversation coming up for you. Before that, want to let you know that Detroit is expanding its Shot Stoppers program. Mayor Mike Duggan says the community-based anti-crime initiative has reduced violent crime in targeted neighborhoods, something we've been talking about this week. So very good to hear that news.
Indeed, Nick. And as we continue on and approach the end of June, the last show of June to be correct, we're continuing our conversation surrounding the LGBTQ plus community here in Detroit and Metro Detroit. The rights of people who identify with the LGBTQ plus community and allies have been fighting for equality, safe spaces, and respect as human beings. However, acceptance remains a hot-button topic for religious groups. Churches throughout Detroit and Metro Detroit have a wide array of viewpoints, and some are for and celebrate same-sex marriages, and others simply do not. Annalise Frank is a local reporter with Axios Detroit, and Annalise researched and wrote about significant religious moments as well as where we currently are in the city of Detroit. Annalise, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So, just giving a little background, June 2015, after the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage nationwide, local churches were divided, and that's the same thing for here in the city of Detroit. So, what were some of the things that we were seeing, especially around 2015, that has led us to where we are today?
Yes. So, of course, 2015 was a huge moment as same-sex marriage was legalized nationwide, as you said. And, there was a lot of celebration going on in churches that, included, LGBTQ plus leadership or were, generally accepting before that in lots of different ways. There's lots of celebration. I talked to, an out gay pastor who celebrated at that time with a church that currently meets in Ferndale that is extremely accepting, MCC Detroit. But, there, of course, were also churches that had to grapple with this change that kind of went against their beliefs beliefs against same-sex marriage and LGBTQ plus identities. So I think that, depending on the denomination and the congregation, there's been lots of ways that these institutions have moved forward from, gradually, becoming more accepting or remaining with the stances that they had held. And I think an example of one denomination that has really seen lots of change would be the United Methodist Church, which just recently this year had a vote in which there was a decision made that it would lift its ban on officiating same-sex weddings. And this is something that has divided that denomination, divided a lot of other denominations. And in Michigan, the United Methodist Church had about 17% of churches leave over the last couple of years over LGBTQ plus issues, mostly, not entirely. And so it really, it does depend on which denomination you're looking at, how it's gone.
Yeah. So, I was just reading up the article, reading some of the information that you put out there through Axios. And Stringfellow is also a board president of Interfaith LGBTQ plus Coalition. But there were so many things that you were talking about. And I wanted to get into Black faith, if you could. And what did you learn about the various cultural backgrounds and their views, especially as we talk about today?
Yes. So, Reverend Roland Stringfellow, he was the person that I was referencing who, he has been in Michigan for over a decade. He's originally from Indiana. He is an out gay Black pastor, and he is the senior pastor at MCC Detroit, which is the LGBTQ plus focused church that I had mentioned. And so I talked with him quite a lot about what he has done at the intersection of, Christian faith and race. And he has actually created this curriculum that he would use in various churches that's designed for Black Christian audiences to create conversations around LGBTQ plus issues and acceptance in a way that supports, people who he's speaking to in churches and also supports, maybe their LGBTQ plus family members, if there's any tensions in that area. And something that he said is that, he really, when he speaks to, various congregations, he does speak to Black churches. He also, speaks with variety of other churches. He has spoken with a lot of, politicians leading up to marriage equality. But he has said, he always does talk about his own struggle and what he experienced growing up, struggling with faith and with his place in the church and finding peace in his religion as somebody who, has such a heart for God, but also had to deal with a lot of tension over lack of acceptance in the larger faith community and in his fundamentalist Baptist upbringing, and so he has created this curriculum that I link to in the story for people who want to learn more about it to facilitate dialogues around issues specific to Black churches.
And this is Annalise Frank, a local reporter with Axios Detroit. Annalise, I wish I had more time to ask you more questions. Of course, we're running up into the time now, but I want to thank you so much for joining us on the show. I will definitely contact you again to revisit this topic in the future. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Always a good subject to talk about, so I appreciate it.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET. And yesterday, like I said, I don't know if you might have heard, but there was a presidential debate between President Biden and former President Trump as the debate occurred on CNN, the first of two currently scheduled. But as folks are really talking about what happened there in terms of the performances from both of these candidates, we wanted to get an idea of exactly what can we learn from communication styles and the way folks present for debates like these. To help us learn more, we're joined by Dr. Ronald Stevenson, a professor and director of debate at Wayne State University, where he watches debates like last night's closely. Professor Stevenson, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
So in terms of judging presidential debate performances, before we get into these specifics, what factors are you looking at to determine whether a candidate had a successful debate or not?
In most instances, there's three primary variables that you want to consider. You want to consider their image and the way that they approach the debate and hold themselves. You want to look at their delivery during the debate, and that includes nonverbal communication. And then finally, their content. So those are probably the three things that, if you were to score it, you would be, putting points in.
If we were to look at factoring those before we get into specifics again, I think most of us, we want to say content's the most important, right? Because that's what's going to matter for being a president. But how much does that factor in versus image and delivery when you've seen from what people react to when they come to looking at these debates?
Yeah, as much as I'd love to agree with you that content should be first, it is often last. And image and delivery matter more because if people don't understand content or content gets confusing to them, they often defer back to image and delivery. So those two really are the more important variables in the situation.
That's right. When you have such a public watching a debate like this, not everybody's going to have the same background information, but many Democrats are expressing concerns with Joe Biden following his performance. So I'll give you the shot now. How would you rate it, and what advice would you have to him to improve for the second debate?
So I think this debate was really a referendum on his physical and cognitive capabilities to be president for another 4 years and to counter the Republican narrative that he's just too weak to continue to lead the nation. And this performance that he put forward really did not do much to inspire confidence and in some ways probably reinforced that narrative. So there's been uniformly negative reactions to his performance kind of across the board. But some of that, I think, was probably the way that he was prepped for the debate. I think that instead of focusing on his delivery, they were really prepping him on knowing a lot of information and having multiple points to answer Trump's claims. And instead, he would have been better served to just have one good point and deliver it effectively. And had he done that, I think his performance would have been much better than it came across last night.
We're speaking with Ronald Stevenson, a professor and director of debate at Wayne State University. And Professor Stevenson, I want to play a couple of clips from former President Donald Trump from the debate yesterday.
51 years ago, you had Roe v. Wade, and everybody wanted to get it back to the states. Everybody, without exception. Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives. Everybody wanted it back. Religious leaders.
You can look at cases from the Supreme Court most recently, Dobbs, in decisions like Casey. We know that's demonstrably false. So when I hear something like that, it lets me wonder about the ability to make grandiose claims like these, and even this one.
As far as Russia and Ukraine, if we had a real president, the president that was respected by Putin, he would have never invaded Ukraine. A lot of people are dead right now, much more than people know. They talk about numbers. You can double those numbers, maybe triple those numbers. He did nothing to stop it. In fact, I think he encouraged Russia from going in.
No facts or evidence in support of any of these claims, just making a statement off the cuff or statements that are false. What's the best way to deal with a debate opponent who are making claims, repeated claims that are false or have no truth value, in your opinion?
So this debate is an excellent. Those two clips you played are perfect examples of the problems that individuals face when they debate or engage in a political discussion who say things without any evidentiary backing, but they say them in a way that sounds believable. And to get back and to counter those types of claims, you have to push them on evidence. There's Where's your evidence to support those claims? And then the second thing is you have to have your own talking point to go back to. In much the same way that they established their position, you have to counter it with whatever your broad position is in response to it. But that's where Biden, and I think the way they prepped him was problematic, because instead of having one point, you could hear him trying to rattle off answers like first, second, third. He was even trying to number them. And that really hurt perceptions of him in the debate because he was struggling to recall. So one good answer and asking for evidence is probably the best way to counter people that don't have evidence.
When you look back to your experience seeing presidential debates, are there any historical analogs that you can think of for the performance we saw from either or both candidates? And where would it rank in your opinion?
I think one of the best analogies, and I was having a conversation with my friend last night about this, is in some ways this is analogous to the Nixon-Kennedy debates, where there were different reactions from different groups. So if you listen to it on the radio, those people thought Nixon had won, and if you watched it on TV, then you thought Kennedy had won. I think if you just read the transcript or just listen to it last night, that you might conclude that Biden might have won the debate because he was better on the substance. However, if you watch the debate and then image and delivery and those dynamics come into play, that's where you get, 2/3 of the American public saying that they think that Trump won the debate. So I think it's the modern analogy to that.
Do you believe presidential debates like these are good ways for us to vet our candidates? Because we mentioned how often you said content is lowest when it comes to factoring image and delivery, as well as Joe Biden's attempts to spout out a lot of facts and getting caught up in them and not performing them so well. Are presidential debates a good way to vet candidates on policy, or what do you think we should do to improve that process for the benefit of voters?
I do believe that presidential debates are an essential part of the political decision-making process, primarily because the job of the president is to communicate the will of the American people. So whoever the candidate is has to demonstrate that they have good communication skills and that they can be persuasive, because that's what you're looking for in a candidate. Even if you don't necessarily understand the specifics of policy, if they're a good speaker, if you have a positive rapport with their image and their delivery, I think that's a necessity for the American public in terms of deciding who they're going to vote for.
Well, when we think of this, then, especially if we want policy or content to play a larger role in it, do you have any recommendations for candidates, people who are giving debates, on the best way that they can convey that information to people who might be of varying backgrounds, might not have the same background information? What's the best way to discuss policy in a presidential debate?
I think that you need to get away from the specifics in some extent and have a more general idea in terms of what your values espouse. So instead of discussing, for example, the particulars about abortion, you need to say, look, I'm just primarily, in support of reproductive rights, and we need to reverse Roe versus Wade. That puts a lot of people in jeopardy, rather than getting into the fine details that most people can't hash out. If they want the fine details and they're more interested in policy, there's the fact checking and the websites that can resolve that, or people can read about it in secondary political commentary. But candidates need to be more focused on the value in their messages rather than the specifics of policy.
There has been a lot of communication right now about the role that a president plays. And you did mention that as a president, it is important to be a good communicator. But on the other point, people are talking about maybe the structures of these debates, something that we've been getting at in terms of how to best have them. Do you think there's a role for moderators in this case? Should there be fact checking in real time, or do you think it's best that it's incumbent on the candidates themselves to do that work, even when you have rules, for example, like muted microphones?
I'm a proponent of fact-checking in real time, primarily because that resolves some of the confusion by the American public, especially people that say they're not interested in politics. They're like, it's not my thing. And in this particular election, where the overwhelming majority of public doesn't like either of the candidates, the sort of double hater demographic as they've been referred to, fact-checking would definitely help sort that out. I'm also a proponent of having audiences. I think that the ability to speak in front of people is an important component of one's capabilities as a public speaker and their ability to persuade. So exempting those two, I like the muted microphone, but I do think you need fact-checking in real time, and I do think you probably need an audience.
All right. I got to ask one more because that's interesting, because I would not have supported audiences, because I think that you can get applause lines and that can color the way that people who are watching are reacting, getting coaching from folks who are in the room as opposed to just what the merits of the argument is. If I were to give you that pushback, what would you respond with?
My answer primarily would be I think it's important for the speakers. I think there's inevitability in terms of audience reactions, whether they are there or not. So just because they're secondary, you don't have necessarily those things. But for the individuals, getting that positive reinforcement, that feedback that they're on the right track, I think is helpful. And I think it's, part of human nature that you need that. And to see that dynamic play out, I think, is important.
All right. We're going to keep you on the line right now. We're going to take a brief moment of a break, a brief pause. And when we return, we'll continue our conversation with Professor Stevenson of Wayne State University. Keep it locked right here on the Metro. It's the Metro 101.9 WDET. I'm Nick Austin alongside Tia Graham. Hey, Dr. Stevenson, we're going to be pivoting to a conversation about the Detroit Pistons, but I do want to thank you for your time here discussing the presidential debate with us.
Thanks, Nick. It was great talking to you.
All right. But like I said, after a disappointing 14-win season, the Pistons entered the NBA draft with a lot of work to do. To hear what they accomplished during this week's draft, we're joined by Omari Sankofa, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press. Omari, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, as always.
Yeah, definitely. 5th pick overall, as well as a second-round pick. What did the Pistons end up doing?
Yeah, so they surprised the league just by going and getting Ron Holland, who a year ago was considered to be in the mix as the best prospect. But the G League Ignite had a 232 season last year, and I think the luster kind of faded on all the G League guys last season. But they picked Ron Holland 5, and he's a very athletic former 5-star wing who's one of the higher upside guys. And then in the second round, they took Bobby Clinton 37th. And he's a little bit older, more of a do-it-all wing, but both of those guys address the wing position for the Pistons.
Yeah, you talk about the G League Ignite team, G League, which is a developmental league for the NBA. And Ron's only 18 years old playing against grown men. So we'll see what that will be like for him when he joins the Pistons, as well as trying to get a little bit more shooting with a guy like a Bobby Clinton, 6'9" forward. But with these draft selections, we still don't have a head coach in place. Do we know what the plan is right now for head coaches? Are there any people on the horizon to help lead this team?
Yeah, they've interviewed a handful of people. They interviewed former Cleveland Cavaliers coach J.B. Bickerstaff. They've talked to James Borrego, who is a former head coach with the Charlotte Hornets, but currently he is with the New Orleans Pelicans as an assistant coach. And, of course, that's where their new president, Trajan Langdon, was before. So there's a bit of a connection there. They have a list of candidates. Micah Nori, the assistant for Minnesota, is in that group. Summer league's in 2 weeks, about 2.5 weeks, so I would think they'll want to coach in by then. And now that we're past the draft, that's another box that they've checked. So I think we'll start getting some more updates on that search within the next week.
Another thing that has people excited is that the Pistons enter the summer with a reported $64 million in cap space. That's a lot. You could bring in a max free agent, but we don't know if there's quite that talent level of free agents out there. What is the team looking to do with the space, and what would you say are their best options?
Yeah, I mean, after a 14-win season, they need a bit of everything. I would say as far as on the court, shooting probably tops that list. They've been a poor shooting team for the last 4 years or so now. And Clinton can shoot, but Ron Holland's not a shooter, so they're really going to have to go through free agency to find some guys who can space the floor for them. Their cap space is about down to around 50 or 51 now. They did trade for Tim Hardaway Jr. this morning. He's a former Michigan alumnus. A lot of people remember him. So he has 1 year left on his deal. And then, of course, they traded for Clinton yesterday. So they're down to $50 million in cap space, but that's still a lot of cap space to find some shooting. So I expect that'll be their main priority on Sunday.
I appreciate that. Bringing me the breaking news. Last question. There's about 30 seconds left. Pistons made Monty Williams the highest paid head coach in the league last year, but he lasted only one season. Why didn't it work out? And did they learn anything from the experience? What are the lessons?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really just began to sever when they went through that 28-game losing streak right at the beginning of the season. I think that's, especially in the professional league, that's really tough for any coach to overcome in the grand scheme. And it just didn't click. I don't think he clicked with the front office necessarily. He didn't click with the locker room. And no one could have predicted how bad last season ended up being. I think that was probably, a pretty outlier outcome considering how they came into the season. But they're definitely going to hone in on player development with their next coach. I think they understand that the roster needs some time to gel, and that's what they're prioritizing right now under Trajan Langdon.
All right. Well, Omari Sankofa, Detroit Pistons beat writer at the Detroit Free Press, thanks again for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's the Metro for Friday, June 28th. You can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt, with additional support from Manel Scott and Sydney Walkley.
Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music's done by Sam Bobian and Will Sessions. And The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. If you like what you hear, want to support The Metro, consider becoming a member at WDET.org/donate.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.
WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM is offering a new master's degree in ethical leadership focused on sustainable, ethical, and inclusive problem solving. More information at business.udmercy.edu.